Good morning, everybody. Brian Neubert here from goldenblack.com, live once again from my cave at home. Apologize for being a little bit late with this morning. I cut myself pretty bad shaving, had to get that under control before I could get on camera. The last thing you need would be for blood to be spraying out of the side of my head while you're watching this, so I did it with you in mind. This is your goldenblack.com Daily Quarantine Simulcast for Tuesday. It is brought to you by our friends at Follett's Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, the 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remaxability Plus. Want to remind you once again, if you're looking for an outstanding dinner or simply to support our local businesses, please keep in mind the 6th Street Dive in Lafayette, as well as our friends at Arnie's in West Lafayette, and all over the state. Bruno's in West Lafayette and the Whitaker Inn in West Lafayette. All of them remain open for carryout orders during this tremendously complicated time in our history. Also, if you're accessing this video on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, because when the world starts to spin again, we will have lots of Purdue stuff on there, and you'll want access to that as quickly as possible. Presumably, if you're watching this, chances are you're pretty interested in that sort of thing. Today's topic, we've been soliciting input from viewers, readers, listeners, whatever the variety of individual may be, about topics for this that you'd like me to talk about during these daily spiels. And we had a question from Dave who asked me to do a primer, so to speak, not the primer on the wall now. If you've been following the show, the color of the walls has finally transformed. A primer on the transfer landscape in college sports, specifically college basketball and college football. I can do that. Basically, it is kind of pretty widely known, but there are two kinds of transfers. One is the traditional year in residence sort of transfer, and there's the graduate transfer. The traditional transfer is one who has to sit out a year when transferring from school A to B. That's called the year in residence. Player leaves school A, moves to school B. Depending on what time of year he transfers, he would have to wait 12 months before becoming eligible at the second school. The NCAA has been much more generous with its waiver process. If you have an extenuating circumstance or you have a lawyer, you will get an immediate eligibility waiver quite often. You've seen that in college football with quarterbacks. The NCAA has gotten pretty generous with the immediate eligibility waiver. But typically players have to sit out a year before becoming eligible. The graduate transfer is obviously the rule where if you graduate from school A, you can transfer to school B with degree in hand and start graduate school somewhere else and compete for that second school with however much eligibility you have remaining. Almost always that's 1 year, but not always. Evan Boudreaux at Purdue had 2 years. Austin Burton, the quarterback who just transferred to Purdue, will have 2 years as well. The graduate transfer rule has been a bit of a lightning rod for criticism because the rule is this. It is an academic rule. It is a rule where if you graduate from school A, you must at school B enroll in a graduate program that school A doesn't have. That's the entire crux of the rule. It is designed for players to be able to get what they want from a graduate program perspective. Obviously, 95 to 99 to 99.9% of those transferring under the graduate transfer umbrella are doing so for competitive athletic reasons. So it is an academic rule that has mutated into a almost exclusively sports-minded rule, and that's why there's been a little bit of opposition to it. There's been some groundswell of support for reforming it to make it more like the traditional transfer process. It is meant, in theory, as a reward for doing what you're supposed to do at school A, getting your degree. After all, that, of course, is the only thing that matters in college sports. I'm joking, of course. But it's something that's mutated from an academic sort of privilege to an athletic freedom, so to speak. It may not matter here pretty soon because there is legislation on the table that would render basically all transfers the same, at least for one time or another. We will get to that a little bit later in this broadcast. But I did want to talk about just kind of transfers in general. I think that, it has become a really, really significant part of the recruiting landscape. There's a lot of different ways to build programs. There's a lot of different ways to build good teams from year to year. And I think the programs that work the transfer portal the best are going to have an advantage. And I think that would preferably be above board, but it is not always. I think that, the transfer recruiting market is much like every recruiting market where it is rife with dastardly deeds, so to speak. I think it is fairly dirty, but it has been part of college sports as long as college sports have gone on. Today, it is probably more prominent than ever because players are more empowered, I think, than ever to leave schools. I think that the stigma of transferring is pretty much dead. I think the graduate transfer wire has obviously opened up a whole flood of athletes moving from one school to the next. So it is, so to speak, the golden era of transfers, especially in college basketball. I think you're seeing a little bit more in football. It wasn't always that big a deal from a perspective of a player going from one school to a similar school for fit, as opposed to basically not working out at the first school and dropping down a bunch of levels. I think that's just across the board. Players nowadays are just more empowered, thinking more that way than probably they used to be. But I will tell you this about the transfer wire. I think it is killing parity in college basketball. College basketball has become a punchline because of it. The graduate transfer rule is basically laying waste to everybody but Power 5 because it is really hard to get a player, keep him in your program without him realizing, hey, I'm pretty good. I don't have to be doing this at Bowling Green or Western Illinois. I can go do this at Ohio State or Michigan, whatever it may be. I'm not picking on them. I'm just using those schools to put a face on a higher level of competition. Players who transfer out of Power 5 to a lower level to have an opportunity to play, then they're always going to have to sit out that year because they've transferred. So that thus puts them on pace to graduate. And that because they will have had to have redshirted, that almost always frees them up for that last year to go transfer back to Power 5 if they want. So players are using those lower levels as kind of a trampoline from down from Power 5 to back up to Power 5. It's almost like the mid-majors and low majors have become the new junior college in that sense. It's just really, really difficult on everybody but the haves in college basketball as opposed to the have-nots. And that's, unfortunate, but that's the nature of college sports nowadays. The big ones eat the little ones, and that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it always will be. And it's just unfortunate because the NCAA is supposed to be about providing opportunity everywhere, and it is really, really taking a toll on everybody but Power 5. This rule that is going to be voted on here this spring about a one-time transfer exemption, eliminating the year in residence for that first transfer a player makes in his career, would be chaos, if you ask me. Absolute chaos. And I wouldn't be surprised at all. This has been viewed as a layup to pass for quite some time. You're starting to see a groundswell of opposition from coaches who should have every reason to be opposed to this. I do kind of wonder if the coaches aren't going to get this tabled by voicing their opposition. I'm not sure necessarily anybody wants this. Anybody's demanding this. Everybody wants what's best for the student athletes. Whether or not they want it for their own reasons or for the student athletes' welfare, I don't know, but people want to give student athletes more control over their careers. That is a noble thing. I think the players deserve it. It is their lives. But I do think this is a fool's errand, a fool's endeavor, for lack of a better term, because I think it will destroy competitive balance, and I don't think that's good for the game. I think it will turn low and mid majors into even more of a farm system than they are right now for the Power 5, because now there wouldn't even be the deterrent of having to sit out a year. So if so-and-so goes to Bowling Green, has a really good freshman year, now he doesn't even have that one barrier that would convince him, hey, this is something I need to think long and hard about because I don't want to not play next year. That's off the table. That would be a real problem for everybody but Power Five. I know when Matt Painter in particular voices his opposition to this transfer rule, he does so from the perspective of a guy who's coached Division III and Division II. It would really, really hurt those schools, obviously. I think it would make it really difficult for coaches to coach their players, which is, sort of important. I think this may sound idealistic, but theoretically, I think part of coaches' jobs is to be leaders of men, to help shape their players in their formative years, to make them into better men. I know that sounds cheesy. I know that sounds like a Hallmark movie, but they are at a point in their lives where they need that sort of direction. And what that involves is sometimes hearing things you don't want to hear. It requires players to be coached, to be uncomfortable, to be made uncomfortable. And now you take out that one barrier that would have prevented a player from just saying, to hell with it, I'm leaving. I think it is going to be a gateway for a lot of bad decisions to be made. If I had to guess, if you polled every player since the beginning of time who transferred from one school to another at some point in their career, a big number would say, you know what, I had it pretty good in that first situation. The reason I transferred was a stupid reason, whether it was getting away from a girl, whether it was a coach saying something you didn't want to hear, whether it was you blaming the coach for all your problems, for not playing, whatever it may be. I think self-awareness comes with age, and I think you would see a lot of guys make a lot of decisions they would come to regret, and I don't think that's good for the game. I think, the transfer wire is not exactly the most wholesome of recruiting environments, and if you go through the list of all the best transfers out there and you notice a couple of random schools and you say, hey, why is this player going there? And why did that school also get this guy and this guy? Figure it out. People are messing with each other's players already. The NCAA cannot enforce its rule book as is in terms of recruiting from the high school levels. It is really hard to tap out tampering. That was a bad sentence. Because there's any number of ways you can get to somebody through a third party, any number of ways you can put thoughts in people's heads when maybe things aren't going so great at the school they're at. Any number of ways to do this. It's happened before to Purdue. It's happened all over the place. It's probably happening right now somewhere. And if that barrier suddenly is down and you realize, hey, this transfer can help me now, or this transfer can help me next year in the immediate short term when I'm in December and I realize my shooting guards are bad, somebody just got hurt, whatever it may be, and you're looking at your team next year and saying, man, what are we going to do? You know what you're going to do? You're going to go mess with somebody's player. You're going to get them to transfer and you're going to get them. Or you're going to legally tamper. Let me use this bizarre example here, this bizarre hypothetical. Let's say Kansas, and I'm not picking on Kansas. I'm not accusing Kansas of anything. I'm saying that I'm using Kansas as the face of the blue blood. Let's say Kansas, just lost a kid to the NBA. Let's say a kid they signed went to the G League instead of came to Kansas. Let's say they have he's a point guard. He was going to be their point guard. Let's then say that Kansas has a point guard on its roster. That kid gets hurt or has a bad year, whatever it may be. And then you're looking ahead to the next year. And if you're Bill Self and your beat writers are asking you, how do you feel about your point guard situation next year? Under normal circumstances, you would say, well, we'll try to go find somebody in the spring, or we really hope the guys in the program now get better. We're going to work with them. We like our guys. Now it's, man, we got no point guard. I don't know what Kansas basketball is going to do. Kansas basketball, who goes to Final Fours every year, who has won X number of national titles, who gets guys to the NBA left and right. I don't know what we're going to do at point guard. What you're doing then is you're signaling to every point guard in the country, hey, come on down, guys. Kansas needs a point guard. legal tampering is what that would amount to. That is probably a bizarre hypothetical I just threw out there, but it is exactly what comes to mind. I think, as I said before, the transfer wire has really, really hurt parity in college basketball. Theoretically, parity should be a goal in college sports, to me anyway. It's not. I do think, though, the transfer wire has helped parity in college football because you're spreading the resources out a little more. So many guys in football redshirt that you're going to have so many guys in that fourth year in the program who've gotten their degrees, who are going to be free to go. And there are so many cornerbacks at Tennessee who are third on the depth chart who could be guys who can make a real impact at Indiana or Purdue or Minnesota, whatever it might be. That I think that really helps spreading out the resources a little bit. You look at college football recruiting, there's no parity in college football recruiting. The same dozen schools are hoarding an outsized percentage of the talent, and anything that can be done to spread out that talent at some stage of that talent's career probably isn't a terrible thing for parity. So I think it's a little bit funny that it has really hurt college basketball parity and probably helped college football parity to a certain extent, because of the sheer numbers involved. One player in college basketball makes so much more of a difference than it does in college football. But that's kind of the nature of the game nowadays. Again, the people who put their teams together on the fly, who are most capable of working this particular recruiting market in college football and college basketball, are going to have an advantage. You have seen this in college football where transfer quarterbacks are the thing. Justin Fields at Ohio State, obviously Joe Burrow, the biggest example at LSU, Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma, Jarrett Stidham at Auburn a couple years ago. I'm forgetting somebody really important, but it is a big, big deal. In college football nowadays, impact positions, and it is a really big deal in college basketball. And if this one-time transfer exemption rule passes, it will be an even bigger deal in college basketball. It will be absolute chaos. Why different rules would apply to different sports is beyond me. I have no idea why you can play a freshman X number of games in football and still redshirt him, but you can't do that in basketball. I have no idea why a one-time transfer exemption is being considered for men's basketball or for basketball period, but not for football. That doesn't make any sense to me. I understand every sport is different. I understand the difference between revenue and non-revenue sports sometimes is such that it makes sense to have different transfer rules for baseball than everything else, but I will never understand why college basketball and college football have rules that fly in the face of one another. That is beyond me, but hopefully for everyone involved, this rule, the one-time transfer exemption that I'm not sure anybody even really wants, is going to get struck down, or at least tabled for an indefinite period of time. So that's what I got on the transfer wire. I hope you found that interesting. I don't know how many of you did, because that was probably a little bit too academic, a little bit too blowhardy, a little boring, but that's what I got. I needed the topic, and I wanted to answer the question that was posed. So thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow. This has been your GoldenBlack.com Daily Quarantine Simulcast, brought to you by Fox Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remaxability Plus. Reminding you once again, if you're looking for a damn good dinner and to support our local businesses, please keep in mind the 6th Street Dive Restaurant in Lafayette, Arnie's in West Lafayette, and all over the place, Bruno's in West Lafayette, and the Whitaker Inn in West Lafayette all remain open for carryout orders, and I'm sure they would all love to hear from you. So please keep them in mind. Thanks, everybody.